Okay, welcome to our webinar on user onboarding mistakes and challenges. I guess we can get started already. So I'm Lucina, and today I'm joined by Adam, as you can see, who is a coach and advisor at ProductLed. Adam, thanks for joining me today. Would you please take a moment to introduce yourself and share a brief summary of your background with the audience?
Yeah, sure. Nice to see you all today. Thank you for joining us, Adam. I work with ProductLed as a onboarding and user onboarding and product-led growth coach and advisor. I work across a handful with a lot of mostly Series A companies trying to figure out how to get either more scale out of the user onboarding or product-led growth or program. Spend lots of time on trial to paid conversions, selecting the right product-led model, free trial, reverse free trial, that fun stuff. I got into this particular work kind of by mistake. I was leading user onboarding at Shopify, not really knowing that it was this like PLG thing. And so after leaving Shopify, I just wanted to keep going deeper into this topic and join ProductLed to be able to do that. So it's been lots of fun, lots of learning. Really like working with a variety of companies who are going through, challenges in product-led growth and user onboarding. And the user onboarding topic is one of my favorite ones. So I'm happy to join you today and talk about it.
Thanks, Adam. So today we'll be discussing the common mistakes made during user onboarding and the challenges associated with it. I guess we can get started already, but yeah, before we begin, I would like to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. So the recording will be made available for future viewing and sharing. And additionally, the presentation materials used in the session will also be shared upon request. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. So user onboarding is a crucial process that can make or break the success of your product. And so we will start this by discussing some common mistakes made during user onboarding. And then I will hand things over to Adam, who will talk about the challenges. But before we dive into the content, I want to start by asking you a question. How many of you have signed up for a product or service and found the onboarding process frustrating or confusing? I know I have. I know Adam had, right? So raise your hands if you have also encountered a sign up form that's too long, too complicated, or just frustrating. So as you can see, our agenda is quite simple for today. About user onboarding mistakes, challenges, and at the end, we will have a Q&A session. All right. So these are the 5 user onboarding mistakes that I separated. So we can start from the first one. And the first mistake that I mentioned is adding friction to the sign-up process. So when users encounter too many steps, lengthy forms, or confusing instructions, they may become frustrated and just abandon the process. It's crucial to ensure that the sign-up process is as smooth and straightforward as possible. Autopilot sign-up flow is definitely an interesting case to look at. One of the potential mistakes in this case is adding too much friction to the sign-up process. As you can see, they're asking too much information from the users right when they sign up. The flow has like high number of steps and fields to fill in, which could be overwhelming for some users. I would say for most of them. It's important to keep in mind that while certain information might be necessary, it's essential to strike a balance between collecting enough information and keeping the process smooth and straightforward. I assume Autopilot's product team sees these steps either as crucial for smooth experience later on or treats them as small aha moments. Yet, from my perspective, the whole process was and is a bit too long. Is it really the good time to ask for the address or a credit card information? Um, I think no. So the copy on the first slide could be more inspiring and exciting as well, focusing on the benefits of using autopilot. Another potential improvement would be to provide a progress bar or some kind of indications to help the users understand how much time do they need to spend on this onboarding flow. It's important to remember that the sign-up flow is often the user's first interaction with the product, so it's crucial to make a great first impression. I think Crisp has a perfect example of a simple sign-up page. They only ask for your email, saving time and reducing cognitive effort. And the sign-up form has a simple design and an easy-to-read microcopy highlighting the benefits of signing up. And additional information is collected later on during the onboarding process to customize the user's experience. However, there may be some specific cases where adding some friction to the sign-up process could be beneficial for the company. An example could be like a fintech or high security software companies. They may require additional verification steps during the sign-up process to ensure that users are who they say they are. This can help to prevent fraud and ensure that the company's products are being used by legitimate customers. Okay. The second mistake I want to talk about is boring users with irrelevant product tours. So this is my favorite topic as I hate product tours. Uh, what do you think about product tours, Adam? Do
Uh,
you like them?
I think there's a lot of data that shows that they're valuable. I kind of see them in two different. There does exist a segment of users that are going to want the guidance, like they want someone to handle them through it. Product tours is great for them. There also exists a segment of users that don't want them. Like I'm more on that second thing. I just usually escape them and just like explore on my own. I think
Yeah, me too.
the reality is as long as you make it easy for users to like hide them or get rid of them, for users who want to go on their own, you give them that optionality. And then it's the best of both worlds. The way I like to look at it is like people who don't your tour will ignore it, and people who do will get value. So don't worry too much about hurting the feelings of people who will ignore you. Like they'll ignore you anyways. So go ahead and put in the product tour. That's how I take it. I think I'll talk a little later about some of the challenges of why like
Mhm.
this can go wrong. But I don't know. That's my opinion about it. I actually like them, and I think there's a lot of data that suggests that they're impactful.
Yeah. Let's see who has ever sat through a product tour that felt like it was never going to end.
Hmm.
You can answer to this question in the chat while I'm presenting the slides. So, in my opinion, while product tours can be helpful in explaining how your product works, they can also be irrelevant if not tailored to the user's needs. Um, it's essential to keep the product tours concise and relevant to the user's interests. But product tours showcase the whole product without prompting any action, usually. They're also very generic by design because they funnel your user down the same path, regardless of what they really need and what they are trying to accomplish with your product. Um, so, what can you do instead? You can use interactive walkthroughs. They are more effective than product tours, I guess, because they provide a more engaging and personalized experience for users. They allow users to interact with the product in real time. And interactive walkthroughs create a communication between the user and the product, which means the user has to complete a certain action so the product can react to that action. They give users the opportunity to learn by doing, which can be more effective than simply watching a product tour. Um, so this was just my perspective on product tours. Now let's talk about the third mistake, which is not providing any contextual help. So let's face it, we have all been there, I'm sure. We are using a new product or service and we have no idea what we are doing. So users need help at different stages of their journey, of their user journey, and it's essential to provide them with relevant information and assistance. And contextual help refers to providing relevant and timely information to the user while they are interacting with the product. This can take the form of tooltips, pop-ups, tutorials, or other form of guidance that help users understand how to use a specific feature, navigate the interface, or accomplish a task. It is not necessarily part of the primarily onboarding. You can use contextual help to help your users discover more advanced features, which will increase your future adoption rate. The fourth mistake that I want to talk about is ending the onboarding after activation. So, just because a user has signed up and activated doesn't mean that they are familiar with all the product features. So, onboarding should be an ongoing process to ensure that users can continue to benefit from your product. Um, have any of you ever signed up for a product but then never really figured out how to use it to its like full potential? Yeah, I'm sure some of you had experienced it. And as products evolve, new features are added which may require additional training or guidance for users to learn how to use them effectively. Or users may have changing their needs or goals over the time, which may require new resources or training to help them accomplish their objectives. Um, and finally, the fifth and the last mistake that we're going to talk about today is not collecting customer feedback. So, how can you improve your product if you don't know what your users want or need? Collecting feedback is essential for understanding your users' needs, preferences, and pain points. Without feedback, you won't be able to improve the user experience and make necessary adjustment to your product. And speaking of improving the user onboarding process, there are like tools out there that can help simplify and optimize the flow. One of them is UserPilot. UserPilot allows businesses to create custom onboarding flows without any code, which can be tailored to each user's specific needs and preferences. All right. Now that we have talked about the mistakes, let's move on to the challenges associated with user onboarding. Adam,
Yeah,
the
thank you.
stage is yours.
Thank you. Maybe before we dive in, are there any questions about kind of the mistakes? Maybe we want to just get some feedback or some,
Yeah,
some
sure.
thoughts on that. So if you have any, maybe drop into the chat, or I think you can come off mute and talk too. Just, anything that maybe we can go into more detail. There's time there's time at the end for us to do Q&A as well, but maybe there's just something top of mind for someone out there. Again, feel free to come off mute or just like drop it in the chat if you'd like.
Mm.
This is a question, Alice. Like, what's the best way to collect user feedback, or something else? The wording and when to prompt. I don't know, Lucina, do you have any thoughts on there? Ways to increase product adoption and engagement. Let's hold those questions maybe till the end. It'll give
Mhm.
us more opportunity to go through them. But like as we go through the next section where I talk about user onboarding challenges, feel free to like drop your questions into the chat. We can either address them as we talk, or like we can hold them as part of like our QA for later. Certainly don't want it to be a one directional conversation for all of you, but for me, I work with a variety of companies, and these were kind of the top 5 things that I think come up with challenges for teams figuring out how to improve user onboarding. Some of them may feel similar to the kinds of things that Lucina already talked about, which is fine. It means that, we've got good overlap of the same set of challenges. But these are the 5 things I want to walk through with all of you. Happy to get your feedback on are these things that you're challenged with today? Getting any kind of context and flavor from you on how these things fit into your current situation is super helpful to have just a high quality discussion. So maybe Lucina, I'll ask you to jump to the next slide. The first one I want to talk about is onboarding is not configuration. I find that a lot of companies that I talk to are challenged with like, what should I have the user experience first? And should I walk them through the whole thing or just pieces of it? And the way I like to kind of create a mental model for people to think about onboarding is using this video game analogy for this racing game. So if you're not familiar with Cruising USA, it's an arcade game. You've got these like 45 seconds to get like your car past like this time extended milestone to get another 45 seconds so you can continue racing. The goal of the race is to get to the end of the race, the finish line, and ideally win. But you have these like time checkpoints that you need to get through. And I really like this analogy for talking about why onboarding is hard, because like this is effectively what you're trying to help your user overcome as they're experiencing your product. You've got someone who's coming to your product for the first time, playing with the product, and you want to get them to some moment in your product where they are willing to give you that time extension. They're saying like, hey, you've got 45 seconds to get them to the moment where the user feels good about what they've observed so far. They can visualize a future in your product and they'll give you more time. So a big part of thinking about, well, like how do we keep that momentum going in onboarding is exploring that like onboarding is not configuration. It's the critical path that users need to go through in order to feel good about continuing to explore and use your product. And so like having them, the broad tool guide experience, often teams are trying to get users to experience everything. And like that slows them down into getting to that aha moment that gives you more, that where they give you that time extended. And so really trying to scale back, hey, what are the things that we don't need users to do right now? Or like, what are the things that are really important to creating momentum so users go through? This is certainly an area of challenge. I'll pause there, like just maybe a quick kind of comment, like how anyone experiencing this right now, like how does this sit in kind of your current mental state of like what's happening in your world? Just maybe +1 in the chat if it's something you're thinking about right now. Okay, Dominica, thank you. Let's move to the next one. So like all this is just food for thought for our Q&A later. But Lucina, if we go to the next slide,
Mhm.
defining activation for your product. So this is always a challenge for teams, and it's hard to land on where. And so when I work with teams on how to pick a moment that's defining activation, I like to frame it as it's probably somewhere between when the user signs up and gives you their email and 12-month retention. The reason I keep it broad is that teams get really stuck with, okay, so what's the data that's telling us that a user has gotten to activation? What's the data that's telling us they've gotten to that aha moment? And I really try to work with teams to simplify that decision. Ideally, activation is not a static definition that doesn't change over time. If you're in a position where you're trying to figure out what is activation for us today, it's more advantageous to pick a point in time than it is to get it right. Because what will typically happen is, let's say your definition of activation is a user who becomes a paid user. There'll be immediate questions around like, okay, but just because they became a paid user, are they a sticky user or are they churning within the first month or the second month? And so you'll typically have a conversation. It's like, well, maybe our definition of activation isn't when they become a paid user. It's when they've actually stayed sticky for 3 months. And what that means is like that your definition of activation can move over time as you're trying to optimize for certain parts of the funnel. So what I typically recommend, or where teams are challenged by, is like, well, what is that point in the user journey that they're activated? And I encourage teams to, out of the gate, try not to make it too complex and sophisticated. Pick a point in time that's well understood by the team, by the cross-functional groups. Start there. And then, like I mentioned, after a month or 2 months of working at it, you'll naturally want to reevaluate that definition. So I think the comfort level comes from knowing that your definition of activation can change over time. It can evolve as you have new learnings. The most important things are that it's something you can measure. It doesn't have to necessarily be tied to the economic event. So it doesn't have to be when users become paid, but it should be something that the team can easily understand. So I'm going through this right now with a company I'm working with. We decided that the easiest way to choose an activation moment was when the user went from trial to paid. Now we've actually extended that to go trial to 3 months trial to 3 month of pay. And that just came from like, hey, we were learning more about users. We felt like we were better equipped to support users by adding tools like in-product guidance and things like that. If we move on, Lucina, maybe to the next one, please. This red, green, and yellow onboarding is a really big opportunity for teams, and it's a challenge. So if you think about your entire onboarding experience, all the steps you're asking users to go through, there's this really neat exercise where for every step, you kind of label it as like red, green, or yellow. So red, things you should stop doing; green, things that are critical; yellow is where the magic happens. Because yellow, what you want to do is look at all your onboarding steps and really consider, do I need to do this now, or can I do this later? So I think, Lucina, you talked about this, like, hey, do you really need to ask for the user's address at the beginning? Can you maybe collect that information later on when it's more valuable? Everything we ask the user can be a point of friction. So we really want to consider what are the things that we can do later. So that's why we label them as yellow. There's a few other categories that live inside yellow. So one is, how do we do that for the user? So one-time setup steps that are really low value and high level of effort for users really, really slow users down. So something we want to think about is like, hey, we typically ask a user to do the following things. What if we did that thing for them? When I was at Shopify leading user onboarding, one of the things we did for users was data migration, moving data from some other system to Shopify. That was really hard for users to do. The particular segment I was working in were particularly low tech savvy kinds of customers. And so what we did is we said, well, look, this is a one-time setup step. They don't have to do it over and over again. They only have to do it this one time when they're migrating over. What if we just do the data migration for them? And data migration was 15% of churn during onboarding, and we basically eliminated it by just doing it for the user. So that's an example of like, let's just do things for the user. There's also defaults. So often I see teams are asking the user to make a ton of decisions. Being able to make those decisions for that user and allowing them to edit that decision later is a great way to maintain momentum in onboarding. There's a couple of different examples of this that I can go through in more detail during Q&A if that's of interest to the group. But like the yellow steps are the ones where like so many interesting happens when you really think about, can the user do it later? Do I need it now? Can I abstract it away? Can I remove it altogether by making decisions and having better defaults? Lots of opportunity there in onboarding. If we move to the next one, this one is always interesting, especially for PLG companies that are kind of defaulting very heavily to like the product does all the work. I think one of the challenges teams face is like not really thinking about the cross-functional way to tackle onboarding across marketing, product, and human touches. I kind of characterize it as like obvious to me isn't obvious. Like as a product person or a designer who's building these things, the instinct is like, well, my UX is really user-friendly and obvious. But if you think about obvious to me is not obvious, you start realizing how important it is to handhold users across that experience. They're coming with varying array of like tech savviness and product sophistication. And so we want to be able to help users get unstuck. And so the way I think about it is, or one of the challenges that I see is teams are leaning very heavily into like the product doing all the work. And really, if you genericize it, it's like your users are going to get stuck experiencing your product. And there's like 3 main toolkits you can help users get unstuck. And that toolkit is through marketing. So like really good content, a good marketing-led onboarding program, how do you put a bunch of really good content into like an in-product guidance program? The product itself, how do you make it a little more intuitive, declutter? Hey, the UI actually isn't as good as we think it is in certain pieces. And then human touches. So, hey, we noticed you're stuck. Click here, set up a 30-minute live onboarding session with one of our onboarding people. Sometimes you can be really effective with large groups of users just by deploying, and humans versus product versus marketing solutions. So, I typically encourage teams to really explore what's the cross-functional way to improve onboarding by really thinking about like, hey, how can we improve marketing touches? How can we make it easier to escalate someone into a support queue? All those things to me should be on the table and should be used. So, the challenge for teams is, I think they haven't thought about these other tools that are available to them. And then the last one, I think, if we just go to the last slide, is about team identity. This one is interesting, especially for teams that do onboarding inside of a CS organization. So there's so much about having like a human-led onboarding program where the people who are doing that work, the people on your team, have a ton of value in their relationships with users and customers and their product expertise. And we're all seeking some kind of scalability in the way that we help users do onboarding. The challenge becomes, hey, as an onboarding team, we have a lot of expertise, but because I, as a human, get so much value and I have so much in my identity tied to my relationship with users, it becomes really hard to help that team feel comfortable about about taking their expertise and packaging it and delivering it in channels and in ways that like aren't one-to-one human interactions. Typically this is a challenge I talk to mostly when I'm talking with like leaders of onboarding teams. This is true also for, more PLG-esque companies where, again, they lean very heavily into the product. If it's as if, for designers, it's as if, hey, if people aren't onboarding well enough, it's somehow a reflection of like my quality as a designer, like I'm not designing good enough. And like, these are just not true. As leaders who lead these teams, we need to make it really comfortable for teams to say like, hey, the way that I do work today needs to change because we need to find a more scalable solution. And just because we're going to take this team's expertise and package it differently doesn't make this team any less valuable just because, you're not having as many one-on-one interactions with users or customers. I'm happy to go into more detail about any of those 5 things, but I think I'll pause there. Those were the 5 kind of high-level challenges that I find myself talking about pretty consistently with teams. And I wanted to offer those up to all of you today.
Thanks, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if we have any questions here.
So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or just come off mute. And like, maybe I'd love to ask like, of those mistakes and challenges we reviewed, any of them are really like a thing you're battling right now? Like, would love to hear what's going on. What is it that's making it challenging, and happy to kind of work through it maybe in a live thing. I know there's a handful of people here, so maybe it's a little vulnerable to ask someone to come and do that, but if there's any brave souls out there, it would be great to do it. I see, Alice, your question, like user education, can you expand there? So maybe for Hadan, how do you manage data transfer? Is it an additional fee that you charge to the user? Can you tell me a little bit more about that question?
I think we can go back because we had some other questions in the beginning.
Sure.
About
like, we know that our participant Lucina can actually talk.
No.
Oh, they can't. Okay, so we'll do our best to address them there. Well, the example I gave, so I'll try to give you, based on my understanding of the question without being able to get like additional context from you. In that particular example where I talked about Shopify and moving data, the challenge wasn't getting data out of the old system. The challenge was users didn't understand how to like manipulate that data to put it into a format that then Shopify could read back in. And so, I remember we were building some like webinar programming to try to make it easier for these kinds of like low tech savvy users to figure all this stuff out. And at one point, like we were teaching a handful of them, like what is a CSV? How do spreadsheets work? Like they were really low level sophistication on these kinds of topics. So, for us, we really just had to help them. Our job in onboarding was let's quickly triage, hey, do we think this customer is tech savvy enough? If not, we actually escalated them into a data migration program where I had a dedicated person work directly with merchants going through onboarding who were helping them like export that data. And then we would use an external team to actually help us do all the data transfer work and put it back into their new Shopify account. That program, we took like that program allowed us to reduce like data migration as a churn reason to 0. and we were able to actually help merchants get up and running about like 10 to 14 days faster. And it was very low cost to us because like it was really easy for us to operationalize that work because we were doing it all the time for merchants, versus level of effort it would take us to educate the merchant on how to do it on their own. So I don't know, Hadan, if that fully answers your question, but if you have a follow-up question, feel free to drop it in the chat. Lucina, do you want to facilitate kind of the other questions?
Yeah, sure. I think Alice was asking about the user feedback, when to collect the feedback and stuff in the beginning, if I'm not mistaken. And somebody else was asking about what to do to not make this microsurveys annoying for the users.
Okay.
So I think it's true that collecting user feedback can sometimes be seen as like annoying by users. But I think it's especially if it's done in a way that interrupts their workflow or feels too pushy. And to counter this, you can consider the timing. I think the timing is the key here. You should choose the right time to ask for the feedback. You shouldn't interrupt users while they are in the middle of a task or trying to complete a process. And instead, you should look for natural breaks in the workflow to ask for the feedback. And another tip for that would be keeping it very short. So don't ask too many questions or require too much effort from users. Keep the feedback very short and sweet and make it easy to complete. And you can also offer some incentives. So consider offering a small reward to encourage users to provide feedback, such as, for example, discounts or early access to new features. And also don't forget to personalize the experience. You can use the data and insights you already have about your users to personalize the feedback request, the micro survey, or whatever it is. For example, if you know a user has been struggling with a specific feature, you can ask for feedback on that feature. That would be beneficial for you and for the user as well.
Should we just go down the list here, Lucina?
Yeah, we can do that. So we covered the feedback.
What do you recommend to best track success of an onboarding flow? And if it is about the conversion rate, what number is a good number? Do you want to take a first stab at that one, Lucina?
Yeah, sure. So to track the success of the onboarding flow, it was about the onboarding flow, right?
If you don't, I'm happy to go first. If you,
Track success of the
if
onboarding. I think there are several metrics you can measure: the completion rate, the time to complete the onboarding flow, the drop-off rate, activation rate, and I think for the conversion rate, if it's about the trial to paid conversion, if I'm not mistaken, it's like 15% is considered a good rate. And I know that 25% is the B2B industry average. So, and the 30% conversion rate is above and above 30%, it's already excellent.
there's a couple of nuances there depending on what your model is. So if you're like a free trial versus a freemium, so free trials will typically have a higher conversion rate. Freemium will have a lower conversion rate. So, those are things to keep in mind. I think what's most important when thinking about like what is good is about knowing like your current baseline and then having a good, being curious enough to say like, hey, our current baseline is 5% conversion rate. Like, where do we think users are getting stuck? So maybe this is more working backwards in your question around like how to best track onboarding flows. I think of onboarding the same way like sales teams think about funnels. So like there does exist, this funnel, they go through a series of steps. You can measure those steps. And really what you're looking for is where's the top one or two places users are getting stuck. You can do that in like product analytics. So it's like, hey, users who did this action and what percent of them went on to do the next action. So if you're using a tool like Mixpanel, you can use those funnel reports. But really what you're looking for is like, what are the 5 key things that users need to get done in order to have success? If you want to take a super analytical approach to that, you can look at like, here's a list of all users who have been retained over the last 6 months. What did they do versus the average? And then figure out like, how do I get users who don't look like retained users to look more like retained users? But it can be really challenging because if you go deep, you can go into like a bunch of analysis paralysis and not know where to spend time. So I'd say simplify your life by thinking about it as a funnel. What are the top 3 to 5 things that users need to do to get to kind of conversion or activation, whatever your North Star is. And then focus on what is the one stage or one step that users are really struggling and attack that first. I find if you spread yourself across the funnel, it's just harder to make an impact on improving conversion outcomes if you're just attacking all of it equally. But knowing that like, hey, I'm seeing a lot of users are finishing sign up, but they're not doing the first step enough. So, only 10% are converting. Why do we think that is? Let's look at Full Story if you're using a tool like Full Story to see like why users are dropping off. Let's do a bunch of experiments to see if we can simplify that step for them or make, I was talking before about like how do we make decisions for users or use defaults. And hopefully what you learn about that is, hey, the 5 steps in our onboarding that we thought were the 5 steps that make up that funnel are wrong. Only 3 of them are actually there. The other 2 are not actually highly correlated to onboarding. Let's go find another 2. So I think the big challenge here is just one of like patience and rigor in trying to find like what are those few things. But I think if you think about it like a funnel, you can start attacking like where in that funnel is the largest, are users getting stuck the most. Happy to go into more detail of that. Dominica, if that was helpful. So Alice writes, it seems like there is a line between hand-holding and user education. Migrating is really hard for non-tech customers, so things like that make sense and should be thought of as a feature that could be adapted. User on the, maybe a comment on that. My observation is one-time setup steps that are like high level of effort. It just takes a long time for users to figure out how to do that. So there's an opportunity to do that for them. So like in our case in Shopify, we did that work for them. In other cases, you see companies try to overcome those things with like templates, for example. Like it's a really simple example, but it's like, hey, I need to like set up or configure my workspace to do a thing. So like Miro is a good example, tons of templates. So it doesn't have to be that you're doing the work for the user. You just want to put the work on the product as much as possible so that the user can overcome that. So some of the things that are interesting is if you think about templates, it's like, well, maybe the template doesn't fit for what the user is actually trying to do, but it's sufficient for the user to get to the next step in the process to experience the value. And so if they can experience the value, they'll come back later to do that high level of effort work to make it more aligned to like specifically what they're trying to solve for with the product. And if it requires high level customization, it's just a matter of like, if it is a high level of customization, that's going to slow them down. So it may be the kind of thing I was talking about, the yellow onboarding steps. It may be those high customized steps you actually want to move to later. Give them a user's like an out of the box default experience that quickly showcases them the actual value they're getting, and then ask them later to go and edit the default so that it's more in tune with like how they want work to be done. So an example of that could be like if you were using like a Trello to like manage a project and you were trying to come up with like what are all the different columns that you were going to move projects through, it could be really challenging to figure out like, well, what are all the steps in our process? Instead, something Trello can do is like, here's a default of like, here are the 5 stages. here's how you know those stages are working for you. Like, let's run a couple projects, and then you can go back and edit it later. So, some things to think about. It's not just about doing it for them. It's like, how can the product allow them to get past that level of effort, and then they can come and edit it later. Lucina, you want to take the next one?
Perfect. Thanks, Adam. As a Jared's question. Okay. What are your thoughts on getting the user to the aha moment before asking them for more information? Business name, industry. So, I think getting users to the aha moment before asking for more information is a great strategy, but it really depends on the industry. I know a lot of MarTech companies are providing a quick win for their customers. Especially, they offer like competitor research tools that allow users to simply paste a competitor's website or URL into the tool and receive the analysis of the website's performance, traffic, keywords, and more without asking any information. Even they're not even asking for your name or I don't know, the company name and stuff. So this can be a quick and easy way for users to gain insights into their competitors without having to spend a lot of time and resources on manual research and without having to fill in this lengthy forms and signing up for the product and then be able to do these things. So it's a really great strategy, but it really depends on the industry.
Maybe I'll just add one other comment there, which is asking for information is totally fine. We talked about, hey, if you ask for too much stuff up front, it can create friction and reduce conversion rates. I think the strategy that I think about, at least, is like, how do I align what I'm asking for to whether that's unlocking value immediately for the user or not. So if I'm asking for like business name and industry, is that because you are going to give them a industry specific onboarding program and then like they're going to get value right away from giving you that information? Putting that question to later. So like if, let's say, the user is already getting value, then you can start asking them stuff. So if we go back, like if you were following along the analogy I shared earlier about like that racing game, like you want to get them to a moment where they have more momentum with you and they have like more buy-in to like how you're solving their problem. Then you can ask them tons of stuff. Like happy users will give you tons of feedback. Well, unhappy users will give you feedback too, but really consider what I call like the spectrum of the needs of the business versus the needs of the user. My instinct is if you're asking for business name and industry, it's more of a needs of the business thing. And ideally you want to get that information from the user to help them, maybe upsell, cross-sell, whatever. If you're trying to like hydrate user data to do like a product-led sales motion, or you're just like creating leads for sales, for example, consider when you want to ask for that. Because it's not immediately valuable to the user. It doesn't like unlock something unique to them. It's not like, I'm assuming it's not table stakes to the product that they're using or the software that you're trying to get them to experience. So, I would say like try to hold those things separately. It's like if we're asking for stuff, it should be immediately valuable to them based on what they gave you. I think it comes back to that example. I was like, hey, yellow steps, like what are things we can ask for later? Hopefully that adds a little food for thought, Jared, on your question.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like if they're asking for information, they should use it somehow. They should personalize the onboarding flow somehow based on that information that I'm giving to them. We were doing this onboarding audits at UserPilot, and at some point when I was signing up, like we were signing up for different products and like providing and like feedbacks, giving them feedbacks on their onboarding flow. And a lot of them, they were asking some information up front and they weren't using any of this data later on during the onboarding. So, for example, I was telling them that I have like 5 years experience of using similar tool, but they were still considering me as like a very new user that just started using this product, and they were like holding my hand and taking me like over all the features they had. So if you are asking for the information, make sure to use that information during the onboarding.
I think we answered all the questions in the chat. Anything else
Yep.
kind of top of mind? Maybe any new aha moments? Otherwise, I think, Lucina, we had just the 45 minutes. So if we're at time,
Mhm.